All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, everyone. So we are here once again with Bryce, aka MBBTCG. It's been about 1 month of BT9 now so far, something like that.
Yeah, I get a good feel of this format. I feel like we have a good grasp of what's going on.
Yep, and we still have about a month to go because BT10 doesn't come out till October 15th.
It's
So
something like that. And we also get the first West Coast regional for us. That's super exciting.
yes, so still a lot of trying hard to be done in the format, and now that we've had like a lot of major events, a lot of data on the format, we can do a pretty solid and robust tier list. So that's exactly what we're doing here today.
Sounds good.
And we're gonna get started right away with Alphamon. This is probably one of the 2 or 3 best decks in the format, pretty much.
I say those three tier 1 decks. This is, in my opinion, the best deck, but there's another deck that could easily fight for that slot.
Okay. Best
This
deck,
deck,
question mark?
this deck I like to call it Lilith Loop Easy Mode.
Yeah.
It basically it's still a combo deck. I would say it requires a little bit more skill than some of the other decks, but not that much more. Essentially, just Turbo gains a bunch of memory, creates either a full OTK or an unwinnable board position,
Yes.
and carries them there. And 90% of the cards in the deck just search each other, so it's very consistent. It's very, very lethal. And if they ever achieve their stack, you've basically lost the game unless you have like really built up defenses at that point.
Yep. And the deck basically puts you on a timer with all their searchers. If you give them like 2 or 3 free turns and they just put out cool boys and black boosts, it's probably over for you pretty soon. So you definitely have to be aggressive against this deck, and if you can't, you probably lost.
Yeah, I recently just put up my guide on how to play and how to counter this deck, and I think I cover all the main points. You got to have some kind of setup to stop it, or it's just going to run you straight over.
Yep. Yep.
And even if it does, I think the reason I personally think this is the best deck compared to the other decks is just because anything that counters it, it has counters for those things. It just has answers to everything, so I don't think it has a single like bad matchup.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. All right, so Alphamon, one of the best decks of the format. We all already kind of knew that, though. So we'll go ahead and move on to Green Hybrid. So
it's one of your favorite decks.
Yeah, I'll talk about this one a little bit. I've been kind of messing around with it. It's pretty much unchanged from EX2. So if you guys ever saw that list at top EX2 with the Gallantmons and stuff like that, it's pretty much the same deck. You could run Grandis Green in the deck because it synergizes with Ancient Beetle, but you really don't need to. For the most part, just like the Ancient Beetle, Troymon, and Argomon lineup is still pretty strong. Argomon especially because you can suspend Tamers for like against X antibody decks, suspending their cool boys so you can't use them, and then have a Terriermon to back it up, and that's a pretty strong like soft lock against those types of decks. But the deck is just one turn too slow sometimes, it feels like if you don't get a good hand, and it's still like you're only running 8 rookies and you can get a little clunky, so it's a weird deck sometimes. You definitely need to know like how your cards interact and your matchups really well to do well with the deck. So for me, this is a solid tier 2 deck, like nothing too crazy. If you're good with the deck, you'll get some wins, but it's nothing to carry you or anything like that.
I agree. It could definitely be. I definitely say it as like a tier 2 deck. I will say one of its biggest issues, I think, is that it is a very board control focused strategy, and sometimes right now that's not viable when things just build in raising area and come out and kill you.
Yep. That is true. You have nothing to suspend when they're just in the raising area. That kind of knocks out a lot of your power. That's 100% true.
I think other decks have like similar issues within this format. They're trying to control the board, and they really can't control a board that's not being built.
Yep. 100%.
Some matchups it still feels really good though. There's still decks that do want to make a board and will try to pressure you that way. But.
All right, moving on to AncientGreymon OTK. So this is quote-unquote red hybrid, but you don't actually do red hybrid stuff. You just build your big tower, and then you come out with AncientGreymon, who swings for 7 checks with ADP built in.
With an Omnimon on top of it.
With a blitz on top, yes sir. This deck notably won a regional, and I don't know, AncientGreymon shot to the moon, stuff like that.
Yeah, one of the early decks that kind of capitalized in this format. It basically is doing all the same things the other X antibody decks are doing without the X antibody stuff. It's decent. It definitely has power, as you can see. It won a tournament, but I just feel as people are developing this format and starting to include like natural blockers in their deck, so they don't just get run over by other things. This deck kind of falls in value because that was part of its main game plan, is just build a stack, hope they don't block it, and kill the opponent that way. Other decks just do what it does better, I think, but it still can do that and it's still lethal.
That's fair enough. The big boon of this OTK versus the other OTK decks in the format is obviously you have the built-in ADP, delicate plan. Your opponent doesn't activate options and security, whereas other decks like BlackWarGreymon X are teching in red in order to get that effect. This deck just has it naturally. That's kind of the big selling point of the deck, in my opinion, over other OTKs. But overall, I think you're missing some of like the higher ceilings of like Alphamon or the speed of Garurumon. So for me, this is maybe like maybe tier 1.5, high tier 2.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe like I'd say like high tier 2, towards the top of tier 2. I think there's one deck like that's maybe above it in tier 2, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
I also say it does have the hybrid stuff, which is kind of nice for helping end games as well.
Yeah, I think the build that top was only running like 2 or 3 red tamers, so that wasn't really like a core strategy. It was more of just like something you could do to finish off the game. But
that's true.
Regardless, hybrid for game, still always good.
You're playing the Burning Greymons to help build the stack, but it can also function as a hybrid. It's nice.
Yes, correct. All right, moving on to what some people were hyping as like the best control deck of the format, but we haven't really seen it do much in the forms of tops. I'm talking about Beelzemon. What do you think about this deck, Bryce? I think it's okay.
Oh, I highly overrated this deck. I thought it was going to be a menace. I thought it was the perfect Alphamon counter. It has all of the things on paper, but it turns out the inconsistencies of the deck are way too hard for it to perform consistently at a high level. I think what it does is very strong, but it does have just way more break potential than I was realizing.
Yeah, 100%. They're just rocking with all those blue cards, like the Kaida's Breath stuff that they need to try to use in order to bounce the Alphamon stack, because BlackWarGreymon doesn't protect against bouncing. That makes the deck more inconsistent already than it already was, and then you have all the milling stuff. And a lot of people are taking in AvengeKidmon right now, and like in a lot of decks, there's just random AvengeKidmons. So it's just like a lot of things going against this deck that you just get silver bulleted by.
Yeah, the AvengeKidmon especially is in another deck I think is tier 1, and that makes it really hard to play this deck sometimes.
So I think this is just it's a good tier 2 deck for sure. Not as strong as people were hyping it up to be.
Yeah, I definitely was expecting it to be tier 1.5, but I would agree with tier 2.
Yes, sir. All right, moving on to Beelzemon. So we saw one top, the Beelzemon hybrid deck, and I'm curious if that was mostly just carried by hybrid shenanigans and not necessarily Beelzemon himself.
This deck seems like a for fun deck. I saw the guy's deck profile. He even said you have to get lucky to win with this deck. But this deck can high roll really, really, really hard because it's like Lightsworn from Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes you just mill the correct cards that just pop you off. But if you're not milling correctly, which is all a luck-based like ability, the deck doesn't really do much. But it's like almost a tier 2 deck, but I honestly think it's for fun, even though it did get second place at a regional.
Okay. By virtue of the fact that it got a second place, we'll put it at the bottom of tier 2.
I guess I agree with that.
All right. Fair enough. But there's not much more to say about this deck. I think people who are playing Beelzemon are playing it because they like him, not because they think the deck is particularly strong.
They like Beelzemon. That seems pretty fun. Definitely has high roll moments. Some people like to high roll it. High rolling is entertaining.
Yes, sir. All right. Moving on to a deck that I have come to really appreciate in this format, and I think a lot of people were sleeping on it, and it's starting to pick up in popularity. We are talking about BlackWarGreymon / I think this is probably one of the most premier control decks you could actually be playing right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best control decks. I highly underrated this deck. I thought it was going to be an easily tier 2. Now I think it's like probably the almost tier 1, but top of tier 1.5 deck. This deck is very competent. Its late game is really strong. It has answers that break some of the tier 1 deck setups, like by destroying all their tamers, or by dtjoeling their stacks, or by... I think something that's really to note about this deck is people started adapting this hyper defensive playstyle. I know someone at our locals does it, but there's also somebody that got second place with this deck at a huge regional, and the best way to play this deck is just hyper defensive. You just build up your stack. You never swing with it until you're ready to basically start winning the game.
Yes, that's definitely, I feel like, the way to be playing this deck. Because the problem is that people get stuck in the me red deck, me aggro mentality. And this is not an aggro deck at all. Like, yeah, you're going to get security +1 with Greymon and Ties. And Gallantmon has security +1. But really what you want to be doing is using the MetalGarurumon inheritable to like attack over things, control board, pop tamers. You have a big blocker that can't be removed by effects. It's a very strong control deck when you play it that way. So I think people get baited into doing the aggro stuff when that's not what the deck strength is.
Yeah, it also has like this, I'd say the second best level 4 in the game right now in Greymon X.
Greymon X and the BlackWarGreymon too, because this makes it so
because it gives it blocker, but
yes.
Greymon X is a house of a card.
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agreed. So if you guys aren't on BlackWarGreymon yet, you guys don't know about the sauce, then you guys know now. This deck is really freaking good. Really good.
Quick point, the best level 4 in the game is in the Alphamon deck. It's the Dexterugramon. That card is nuts.
Yeah, true. Blocker retail. Always
Blocker
good.
Retail, gain memory.
Yeah, too good. All right, moving on to, I assume this is Blue Hybrid. This is Commandramon.
We should talk about like all of the Blue Hybrid lists kind of together. So this would be Blue Hybrid,
okay,
the Leomon deck, and Gabubon.
Sure, that makes sense. So
they're like all sort of a Blue Hybrid style of deck.
So this deck hasn't really done much in terms of tops. I think there was one random top with the Blue Hybrid.
Yeah, one at the very beginning of the format with like a Magnagurumon style, but we're seeing the Tommy nerf come into effect.
Yes, we are. I honestly thought the deck would be doing a little bit more than it is. I don't know if it's people are just not playing it because they got tired of it from last format, or if it's really just not that good anymore. Or the format before that. Yep, it's been a long time with Blue Hybrid supremacy. But I still think the deck is pretty fine. Soren Joe is still really good. It's one of the only ways you can break like a lot of like the big towers. And sure, you don't have Tommy anymore, but Soren Joe can get you there, and you still have Howling Boost, Howling Crusher if you want to run that. There are ways to break stacks still in Blue Hybrid.
Break stacks. I think the biggest issue with Blue Hybrid is that one, we're in an OTA format that likes to build in raising area. And so they can't really interact with that part of the game plan. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, because they only have the one Tommy, they only have like one access to stuns that's not Korikakumon. And that deck doesn't really have good defense. It's never had good defense. It's just when it was good, people didn't have ways to easily kill it through just being them able to stun the board. Mm-hmm. And also Tommy was sort of a security bomb, as it like got rid of sources that gave you extra damage and stuff.
Yeah,
so even though you have the ability to stun a lot of things, it doesn't stop an OTK from happening to it.
Yeah, you just have to load up on Kakaitis Press and hope you hit him in security. That's probably the way right now for Blue Hybrid.
So this is, I'd say, a low tier 2 deck. It still has hybrid shenanigans. Hybrids are kind of an inherently broken mechanic.
Yeah, and Beowulfmon is still really annoying. The recycling the level 4s is it's the only hybrid that can do that, which is really lame.
Yeah, it's still solid, but definitely not like a tournament like terror like it was before. And I'm glad that deck was the best deck for two formats. It kind of skipped BT8. It was still good, but it really came right back around in EX2.
Yep. Correct. All right, moving on to
the other hybrid decks.
The other hybrid decks, yeah. So let's talk about. Okay, yeah, let's talk about Gabubon. That one is, again, not really seeing much play like at all. I think losing 2 security to warp is like a huge detriment right now. I think that's an L.
Yeah, they have to be able to kill you or it doesn't do anything. But otherwise, it's basically doing the same thing as Blue Hybrid. All the same points cover.
Yep. And then there's Leomon Hybrid, which is just Blue Hybrid, but you play some EX2 Leomons, and
it's the for fun version of that deck, which is already kind of struggling right now.
Yeah, I think they're all kind of whatever. The standard, like you just play like your one Tommy, you load up on Kakaitis Breaths and you pray. I think that's probably the best way to play the deck right now. Yeah,
for sure. So yeah, I'd say Gabumon is basically just as good as regular Blue Hybrid, and then Leomon is for fun.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, Cherubimon, aka basically this is purple hybrid, right? Purple yellow hybrid.
Purple hybrid. I think this is full copium, but people love it. There's a meme about the Church of Cherubi. People love this deck, but it's not in the power level right now.
No,
the meta is too fast. This deck already had problems being a little slow. Mm-hmm. Now the meta just sped up another notch, and it really can't hang.
Yep, I agree. If you want to play purple yellow deck, there's an Ophanimon deck now that's pretty good. So, and even I think just straight purple hybrid. I know there's like a Riki Loop deck right now that's pretty good. You just like super fast. You just spam out like your Rikimons and just Dark Calling from Darkness and back.
Yeah, I think that was similar to like what the Beelzemon deck was doing that topped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's no reason to really be doing Cherubimon stuff anymore, unfortunately. All right, moving on to one of the funniest decks of the format, the Commandramon.
This deck is always a fun deck,
Yeah.
but it's actually, I would say, like the top of tier 2. This deck has been in the last like few regionals just always managed to sneak one top in every single regional event that we've had.
Yep.
It's very, very strong. Just the consistent floaters that has are really powerful. This deck just keeps putting on pressure. It doesn't do anything insanely powerful, but with Death X and the new Tamer kind of together, give it kind of a more better resource loop of like not running out of threats. As long as you hit one or two of your namesake Commandramon that recycles itself, your deck is probably in a winning position.
Yep, I agree. Death X definitely a card that you can abuse in this deck.
This deck has the aggro plan, but Death X lets it beat the other aggro decks, which really nicely.
And you still have Darkdramon for game, so
and Darkdramon for game, or Darkdramon into level 7s.
That's true. That's true.
Like Death X.
Lots of things you could do. So yeah, Commandramon probably the best pure aggro deck right now. Probably.
Yeah, there's not really pure aggro. Although I would say one deck is sort of an aggro deck, but it's more combo aggro.
Okay, fair enough. All right.
But yeah, it's more pure, just slam dudes, hit you in the face, rookie style.
Fair enough. Moving on to Dex Jarugumon. This is a meme deck, right? Like.
Yeah, it uses all of the good pieces of Alphamon except for the best pieces.
Yeah. Bloop. Maybe for fun. Okay.
It isn't the for fun tier. It's basically just Death X Turbo. Yeah. But normally you play Death X, you're playing it in a specific scenario, not just to play it out whenever. And I think, other than that, it doesn't really do much else. And you might, if you're going to use all those same cards, the Jarugumon line, you might as well just do Alphamon stuff and win the game.
Yep. All right. Moving on from the for fun. This is, let's see, you're talking about
Goblin.
We already talked about.
Yeah.
This is Gallantmon.
This also got X antibody support, but it has the similar problems as the blue hybrid in that it needs stuff to remove and it doesn't have anything to fight for board with. So it's even worse than all of that. So it's kind of a for fun deck. People really like this deck. It's definitely a fan favorite, and it did get support. It's just not strong enough and doesn't meet what the format's really doing right now. Like what is strong in this format?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, no, there isn't really anything. If you're gonna play a red deck, you have way better red deck options than Gallantmon.
Yeah, this really wants to be deleting stuff, but BlackWarGreymon's better at deleting stuff. It has ways to trash security, but why trash security when you could just OTK them with one of the other red decks? It's just lacking to the other red decks. Yep. It does have the benefit against maybe like a security style deck that it does trash the security without activating it. But other than that, it's just too weak.
Agreed. All right. Moving on to Grandis Green OTK.
The most overhyped deck of the format.
Unfortunately, I'm inclined to agree. It does get tops. It does get tops, but it hasn't won anything, and the deck is just really fragile. So it's like if we're talking about like the 3x antibody OTK decks, right? So there's WereGarurumon, there's Grandis, and then there's Alphamon. Alphamon has the highest ceiling. WereGarurumon is the fastest, and Grandis is like in the middle. So it's not quite fast enough, and the ceiling isn't quite high enough. And if you lose your one stack, like your Dunzos, unless you have Mimi, you need like pieces, and getting pieces in green is always just the worst problem. So.
It has the green inconsistency issues because most of their drawing and searching is based on just digivolving their cards.
Yep.
It does have new searchers, which help, but it's mostly the fragile. It has really strong things that the pseudo ice wall effect from
the promo Coolmon.
Promo Coolmon, which is really strong and really obnoxious, but it's just dying to everything. The decks that play security bombs really mess this deck up.
Yes.
Whereas the other decks have pseudo answers to security bombs. Alphamon having just ways to be immune to them, and MetalGarurumon's just sometimes being fast, where so fast it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Megadeth for against this deck really sucks. This is oh boy. Realistically, 1.5.
I think it's like the low end of 1.5.
Yeah, I'm inclined.
It's still still a solid deck, but it's just people thought this was going to be one of the best decks in the format, and I'm like, it really wasn't. I just assumed it was going to have green problems, and it did.
Yep, always, never fails. All right, speaking of another green deck, quote unquote green deck,
blue green,
Imperialdramon. So in my opinion, Imperialdramon is just WereGarurumon, but slower, and the trade-off is you get access to 4 Megadeth.
Yeah, 4 Megadeth is a really nasty card right now. It's so good against so many decks.
Yes, it really is.
I think it's easily a tier 1.5 deck. It didn't get any new cards. It's just it's able to adapt its builds to combat the meta very well.
And you can still God Hand with Imperial, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So
yeah, its God Hands are still like it's the only deck that can really play HPD, and HPD is still a busted card.
Yep.
If your deck is allowed to play it, it's insane, and the other green decks just aren't allowed to play it like this deck is.
100%. Card should probably be banned, but that's a discussion for another video. Moving on to Yellow Hybrid. So Jet Sylphimon got limited to 1, and Yellow Hybrid pretty much got crushed. There's a couple interesting variants you could take. You can play RiseGreymon or AncientGreymon X for your level 5s.
I've seen basically 2 different directions of this deck. There's the RiseGreymon version of the deck, which is kind of more board control and getting extra security attack with the RiseGreymon from 1.5.
The yellow one.
Yeah, and then kind of using RiseGreymon X as your boss card, and that's a yellow-based version. And the other version I've seen is more of the Gallantmon version that is more from Japan, but they don't have as much healing, so they replace the healing with more like red hybrid Digimon to have more hybrids and just get poke damage constantly until the game is over.
Yes. I have also seen people play the BT8 Shakomon, because when Digivolving you just recover 1. It costs 4 though. So
it costs 4 if you're not fusing, and that feels kind of... Jet Sylphimon was such a house of a card. It still is a house. 1 memory, Digivolve is already strong for level 5, but plus it healed you. That card was nuts. So them nerfing it obviously had a huge impact on the deck. I still see it doing decently. It's been topping, like kind of similarly to Commandramon, where it gets like maybe 1 every tournament with either of those 2 builds, the red-based security control-esque build or the RiseGreymon, Shine Greymon type build. But it's like a solid tier 2 deck, which is a much more healthy place for this kind of strategy.
Yeah. If you want to play a deck that recovers for 1 memory, there's another one that you could be playing. Oh, we're getting there, though. We're getting there. All right. Moving on to... This is, I assume, Leomon Tribal.
This is the Leomon decks. There's Leomon Hybrid, but there's also Leomon Tribal. They're both... Yeah. They're all for fun.
Okay, the Leomon Tribal deck is kind of sick, though. I kind of dig it.
It does look like a fun deck. It does get to play Megadeth because it's blue-green.
Pangeamon, blue-green, baby. Yeah, this shit's nuts. It's really for fun, but it is very, very fun.
Also, it does seem like it can have really strong effects because on deletion, gain 3 memory. That's a lot of memory to gain for something, but it doesn't have the strong enough support to really do anything with that memory, except for maybe like set up more tamers or something. Yeah, it needs like a boss card. And I think there's like a version where you play like Imperialdramon top end, but at that point you're just playing worse Imperialdramon. So, you know. Imperialdramon's strength is part of it is that it can search all its own pieces. Yes. All right, moving on to the Cope deck of the century. Oh, this is my Cope deck. I love this deck. Leomon. It recently got a 4th place finish at a big regional. Yes. And before that, I would have said it's a strictly for fun deck, but we'll move it all the way up to tier 2 because it is able to kill things still. Yeah, I think you can definitely still player difference with Lilith Loop. You've always been able to. You can, but the deck also just requires so much like cutting of space for luck. A lot of the builds are playing 8 rookies, similar to Alphamon builds, but with less consistency cards. They have to play Analog Youth, which is not Cool Boy. Yeah, true. They just have to, and then Sky Mode is kind of a rookie if you want, but you still need Scatter Mode to die, and sometimes Scatter Mode just hits Tamers and they get more set up and you feel so far behind. When Scatter Mode dies and you get your nice stack that lets you discard and basically set up 10 your trash immediately, That definitely still feels strong. It's just you're so reliant on scatter mode, drawing scatter mode, and just scatter mode gets you set up so much, and if you don't have it, the deck feels like super fragile.
Yep, very true. Kind of the same problem Beelstar has. All right, moving on to security control.
I think this is the third best deck of the format.
Third best deck of the format, he says. This is tier 1 deck, security control.
This is tier 1 deck. If I was to be 100% honest, it's sort of a triangle of decks.
Okay.
In that, not entirely because they all I think can beat each other, but I think it's this Melga and Alphamon. Alphamon destroys security control because it just makes itself immune to most of its threats.
That's true.
But security control can easily beat any deck in the format that's not named Alphamon.
That is also true. And when we're talking about security control, we're talking about the Junomon AvengeKidmon variant, right? Where you just loop all your cards, all your options back into your deck.
Yes, but there was a new variant that topped recently that is more of it was Magna, and it was more of an Ophanimon variant. It played 4 Ophanimon and 4 Death X.
Interesting.
With 7 level 5s to play, not just the Angemon. Okay. So security control is always just like a deck builder's dream, but when you play it, you're just playing a very simple heal myself game plan.
That's true.
This deck always thrives in 1-stack formats because hard removal is so much stronger when you're only dealing with one thing at a time. When you deal with hybrids that you have to deal with like multiple threats, it's much harder for this deck to do well. Whenever it's a 1-stack format, this deck's rears its head. It's been here since 1.5. I don't think it's ever going away unless they fundamentally change how the mechanics of the game work.
Yep. Once options stop being free in security, then that's when we'll see this deck go away. But until that day, it's a tier 1. All right.
The only reason it was never... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
The only reason it was ever not tier 1 was that we were in a hybrid format and it doesn't interact with tamers.
Yeah, that's more of just like a lack of tamer destruction card design issue, which we are definitely going to come to a reckoning with next format with all the tamers and cross. But
yeah, it doesn't interact with just tamer boards, so it's always struggled with that. But if it's ever not that kind of format, this deck's going to thrive.
100%. All right, moving on to Armor Rush, Magnamon X. I think this deck is okay. Like, it's a good deck, but I feel like I only lose to Double Fire Rocket Cheese.
It's kind of like on the border of 1.5 and 2.
Yeah.
It's a lot slower than other aggro decks, even though it's technically aggro. It's more of just like a beat-down mid-range deck where you just slowly are doing one check at a time with things that are really annoying to remove. Yep. But decks are just getting better at removing things. Alphamon can clear this deck because they de-digivolve then kill things.
Yeah. Gallantmon does the same thing.
Gallantmon does a similar thing. So it goes past the armor mechanic, but it's a solid deck, and it gets to play Megadeth, which is just an obnoxious card.
Yep.
I know you have a vendetta against that card.
Megadeth decks are a little too good. Just kidding. They're fine. Yeah, this deck is fine. Nothing wrong with it. It's a strong tier 2 deck. Maybe tier 1.5, but yeah.
I would say it coasts like maybe the bottom of 1.5, but it does seem to get like a top or 2 every format, similar to other decks like Commandramon. But Commandramon took a little bit while to bloom over this deck.
Just because this deck runs 4 Megadeth, I'll put it on 1.5. That's
so because it beats the other decks that lose to Megadeth?
Yes, exactly. All right, enough said about armors. We will move on to Mastemon. This is one that people kind of dropped at the beginning of the format and hasn't really been picked up too much since. You played this deck a lot. What do you think? What's keeping it from topping?
This deck is very good against board-centric metas and pretty weak against OTK. It has to get lucky and hit the only security option in the deck that beats OTK, which is Chaos Degradation. If it doesn't have Chaos Degradation and security, its other security bombs don't really do that much against really strong stacks that also remove its board. It's still very strong when you hit the combo and get the set up your Mastemon. It makes them much harder to swing into you and kill you because sometimes the security just double kills you because it summons a guy and Mastemon will trigger and kill more guys. But this deck's just so vulnerable to decks that are building really destruction immune stacks and killing you.
Right. All right. I mean, I think that's pretty much all there is to be said about it. It's a tier 2 deck, though. Yeah.
It's a tier 2 deck. It still has a strong mechanic to it. It's just sometimes it can't achieve that goal against a lot of the decks.
Yeah.
And also, one of the decks it was favored against, I think it's no longer quite favored against. It's more of an even matchup, which was BlackWarGreymon.
Yes.
Greymon X is a hell of a card.
Yeah, that's very true. Greymon X, very good. Gallantmon, dtjoel and Blitz over things is very good. So, yeah. Fair enough. Moving on to the final best deck of the format.
Arguably the best deck of the format.
I think that's true, actually.
I'd say it's a coin flip of Alphamon and Melga.
It's the fastest one for sure. So
it is the fastest deck. So it's kind of like a combo deck, but it's like an aggro combo deck.
Yeah, this deck pops off at level 5, where all the other OTKs have to wait till level 7, essentially.
Well, yeah, Grandis is sort of a level 7.
Yeah, exactly.
So the same thing for Alphamon. And there is another OTK deck, but it's not performing. So this deck is just, it's so fast. It's once they only need to get to the level 5, and they're already dealing like 5 security checks to you, like at blitz speed. Its biggest issue compared to the other OTK decks, or I guess it's specifically Alphamon, is that it is vulnerable to security bombs, which makes it more vulnerable to like Mega Death or security control, or any black tech options of like Ultimate Flare or Iron Fist Onslaught. So any kind of bombs that can really stop it, it does get stopped by, unlike the other deck. But sometimes it's just so fast and could just easily build up a second stack because it's built on level 5s, not level 6s and 7s.
Yes, and also the deck has room to tech in Hero and ADP, which we have seen win. So.
Yeah, it doesn't need it also. They can play that, or it can play Hero build or no Hero build and still just do fine. The core is just so aggressive and just murders your health bar.
100%. So there we are, our 3 best decks of the format: MetalGarurumon X, Alphamon, and Security Control. So
I would say my opinion is that Alphamon is the best deck, but I could easily see the argument for MetalGarurumon being the best deck.
I think MetalGarurumon is the most played, so I think
it's probably a little bit easier to play than Alphamon.
Yeah.
Also.
Oh, for sure, it's easier to play than Alphamon. Yeah.
I think Alphamon's an easy deck, but I also play Lilith Loop, and I already am accustomed to playing complicated combo decks.
Yep.
And this is not as complicated of a combo deck.
Fair enough. All right, moving on to the deck that won the first 2 tournaments in BT9. Got a lot of hype and hasn't really done much since.
It's been like kind of still doing a little bit, but yeah, this deck surprised me a lot. I didn't expect anything out of this deck. Turns out the 2 new cards that are not even for this deck turned out to be excellent support for the deck.
Yes, the X antibody option making the deck 1 turn faster is actually huge, and this deck abuses Death Xmon really well. So those are basically 2 things it has going for it.
Yeah, even against like a tier 1 deck, if you're able to establish a Gatekeeper, it is really obnoxious.
Yeah, there are decks that have outs to it, but it is still hard to deal with.
Yeah, I think the only issue is that Alphamon can be faster or can straight up just remove the Death X, and MetalGarurumon is just faster. It's always going to be faster than this deck.
Yep, 100%. And also, the more popular BlackWarGreymon gets, the worse this deck gets, because BlackWarGreymon is... It just eats Mother D-Reaper, just attacks over unsuspended. But
yeah,
easy.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason that this deck was so good early, is that there wasn't as such an influence of BlackWarGreymon, because the BlackWarGreymon deck wasn't really solved yet. But now that people are realizing just how strong of a threat that is and it's being played more, this deck is falling in value. Yeah. I'd say it's maybe a 1.5 deck. It's because it's still so obnoxious if you let it get off. It's just you're on a clock just like you are in Alphamon decks, but it's a different clock that you're on.
I'm torn between top of tier 2 and bottom of 1.5. We'll put it here just because it's one of few events.
Yeah. Commandramon has it 1 events. This 1 2 events like back to back.
Yeah. All right. That's reasonable. By that logic, I guess it's a little better than Grandis and Armors and Imperial.
Armor has more tops though, I think.
All right, fair enough.
Armor has like generally gets like 2 tops almost every tournament, or at least early on, and this one was getting like 1 person was playing it, but they did really well with it.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. And moving on to one of the newer decks that's getting popular right now. I caught wind of it like barely last week, and all of a sudden I saw a bunch of people talking about this deck. It is the Ophanimon Loop deck. It's being called like purple yellow angels, purple yellow good stuff. It's being called. Essentially, you abuse Gatomon being able to digivolve into Angelmon for 1, and then you go into Angelmon X on top of that for what is essentially recovery +1 for 1 memory, which is we all know is good from Jet Sylphimon. And then you go...
Yeah, it doesn't cost anything to go over the other Angelmon, right?
Correct, it's free. Angelmon X is free. And then you go into Ophanimon Fall Down for 4, get another recovery, and then Ophanimon Fall Down pops a level 4, and then on deletion, you bring back out the Gatomon, start all over again. And there's a bunch of different techs you can throw in the deck. Neo Devimon, more Flame Health Scythe targets. You get Galzimon and Psychmon access as your bottom end. So you have like the 2 best floodgates in the game right now, pretty much. It's a lot of good cards. You run the BT3 Mastemon as well, so you can go Mastemon, trash a card, bring back Black Gatomon, and then threaten security +1 with the Angelmon inheritable, and then Black Gato swings. So that's 4 checks in 1 turn, basically. So you have the opportunity to do beatdown, do a little control stuff. You can run 4 Chaos Degrade, which is probably the best removal spell in the game right now, I would say.
Yeah, I've seen this deck a little bit. I really haven't got to play against it or like know what it's capable of, but from what it looks like, it's basically a Mastemon deck without the Mastemon and more focused on the healing loop and the ability to recycle one of the best level 4s in the game in Gatomon, the card that carries that deck.
Yep. It's like a kind of like a mid-rangey deck. It's a little mid-rangey. You just kind of swing in with the Ophanimons, and then you can do stuff with Calling from Darkness too. It's a very fun deck for sure. If you like the healing stuff that Jet Sylphie was doing before it got limited, this is a deck that you definitely want to try out. But I think since it hasn't really done anything, we haven't really seen it too much. It's pretty new. It's for sure a tier 2 deck. For sure.
It's definitely competent.
Yeah, it feels really good.
Do you think it has room to move up since it is a very new deck?
I think we can definitely see it top tournaments, especially if people aren't prepared for it. Like they think maybe it's just plain old Mastemon, like DNA fusion Mastemon, and then they get bopped by BT3 Mastemon. Like that could definitely be a way to win.
For sure. I was just saying, do you think it has room to be a tier 1.5 deck, or do you think it has the tools to compete with like tier 1 stuff? Or is it a little bit behind still?
It's a little fragile is the problem. It's a little fragile. So if you don't see Gatomon, you're a little dead in the water, in my opinion. Like you just can't be fast enough.
That's fair.
And also you're hard playing stuff for like 6 memory sometimes, which is always kind of a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, I mean Mastemon kind of did the same thing, but they have ways to search it, so hopefully that like makes up for it. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah. All right. So Ophanimon Loop, really fun deck, but definitely tier 2 for now. Moving on to Rise Gray X, like pretty much like red yellow.
Yeah, this is we were talking about this earlier. It's the other yellow hybrid deck. We could just kind of slot right up there. Already
fair enough.
Set our piece on that.
Move up right next to Jet Sylphie, and finally, the worst WarGreymon deck.
The worst OTK deck.
Yeah.
Doesn't
also
actually
true.
have the capability to really OTK you.
Yeah. Unfortunate.
It reads like a crazy card, but it has the problem that it's trying to fight for board in a format where you're not fighting for board that much.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people like pop off with this deck, but every time someone pops off with this deck, I'm like, you could have just played AncientGreymon, done the same thing, and actually win.
I think it's a pretty high tier 2 deck in this fact that it has gotten some results in tournaments.
Okay.
But it definitely feels like the weakest Greymon deck. Like, the other Greymon decks are just, out of all the 3, this is just the worst of the 3.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is surprising, because I actually thought it would be the exact reverse, in that BlackWarGreymon was going to be the worst of the 3, and this would be the best of the 3. And I was completely wrong.
Nope. Gaiamon too strong. Greymon X too strong. That's the real winner right there.
I mean, it's in both of those decks, so...
That's true, but I'd rather have BlackWarGreymon than WarGreymon X. Oh, man. All right, so that does it. BT9 tier list. The meta is surprisingly diverse. Surprisingly.
Yeah. There's a lot of diverse stuff to do in this format. I will say, I personally, it's not my favorite, only because sometimes the diverse things they're doing are essentially trying to achieve the same thing, just with slightly different play patterns. But it's really diverse, and there's actually a lot of fun stuff you can be playing in this format. Like, almost anything in Tier 2 has some really interesting gameplay loop, and even Tier 1, sometimes they do have some entertaining games, although mirror matches of Tier 1 or any kind of OTK versus OTK, it's not the best
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I agree. If you're playing tier 1 versus tier 1, the game can feel kind of coin flippy or like frustrating. But once you move down to like you're going 1.5 tier 2 like against each other, there's a lot of like fun matchups. It's actually like really fun, like surprisingly. So if you just like eliminate the top 3 decks from the meta, I think everything would be really sick. But hey, if you want to win,
you play the winning decks.
Yeah, if you want to win, then you play the winning decks, 100%.
So would you say that what we listed is a solid top 5?
Yeah, for sure. I think, yes, Melga, Alpha, Security Control for sure, top 3. I think BlackWarGreymon is definitely right under there. I think once people start getting better with the deck, now that the build is basically solved and the playstyle is kind of solved, once we start seeing better pilots take on the deck, I think we're going to see a lot more results from BlackWarGreymon. And then Armors and Imperial are basically
kind of similar.
The 2 Mega Death decks, essentially.
Yeah.
They're like Mega Death beatdown decks. And then you have D-Reaper, which is just going to be D-Reaper, the best Death X deck probably. And Grandis, which is kind of just sitting right outside as like the 3rd best OTK deck.
Well, actually, it's the 2nd best Death X deck because Security Control is a deck.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
But they're both really good. Death X is a crazy card if you have the control tools to support it.
Yes, sir. All right. So I think that's going to do it for the tier list. BT9 tier list. You guys can carry this until pretty much October when the next set comes out.
Yeah. Overall, it's decent. Decent format.
Yep. Not much more to say. All right.
Not much more to say.
Thanks for joining me, Bryce, and we will see you guys in the next video. GG's.
Y'all have a good one.